In this video we'll have a look at the print function in Python 3. We have the shell here of idle. Let's start a program file on this side. And the print function is very straightforward. We have a bracket because it's a function, so everything you say has to be in between brackets. And in that we basically can give a number of arguments, which can be text or different variables, which will be output to the screen. So it's your communication with the user. So for example, the position is 1, 2, 3, and then this will be printed. And if I do a print statement at the next line, ready, then because this is on the next line, this will be printed on a new line, because by default, when I use the print function, by default it ends with a new line character, and a new line character in Python is indicated by \n. So by default the end is a new line character, and if I have more things that I print, I can put different values with commas in between, and they will be by default be separated by a space. You see sep is space here, which means by default they will be separated by space. So if I run this, it does what we expect. It must be saved. temp.py, the first time I run it, it asks me for file name. It already exists, but that's okay, overwrite it. And then we see the position is 1, 2, 3, ready. Now, if we have different variables, which are defined like this, 2.5, and z is -3.4, and then we want to print this, we can simply separate it by a comma. Position is comma x, comma y, comma z, and this will then be printed. Those values will be printed, separated by a space. You see the difference because this is in between quotes. It's noticed this is literal text, while this is a variable, and it's an expression, just like this basically is an expression. This expression gives a text, but this expression will return the value of this variable, which we have defined here above. You see that I use the point here, 1 point divided by 3 point, and that's the decimal point makes sure that these are floating point variables. Because there are two ways in which numbers are stored in Python: integers, round numbers, and floating points, which also can have a fraction. By default for computing you want to use floating point variables. And more about types you will discuss when we discuss the input function. But for now, so it's important to know that these are floating point variables. They have a decimal point. And you need to type the decimal point even when there's nothing behind it. 1.0 or short 1 point is enough to tell Python this is a floating point variable. In this case, because we have a division 1/3, it will by default will be a floating point variable, because in Python 3, even if you divide integers, when it cannot solve it with an integer, it will make it into a float. So now the position is x, y, z, ready. Let's see if this runs and what it produces. And we see indeed the position is 0.333, 2.5 minus 3.4. Well, we saw that by default there is an end, a new line as ending character, and by default we have a space in between the different variables. But this we can also change. So if we would do it like this, if we say the position is, and the print the XYZ on the next line. Don't like the spaces in here, but okay. The XYZ on the new line. Then we could specify, for instance, that the ending character is nothing, which means it will not go to the new line. Or we could indicate here that the separator should be a comma for this print statement. And now the result will look differently. If we look at the result now, we see that indeed the position is, there's no space in between here, because the end is nothing. We could also have made it into a space, maybe a bit nicer. Let's run it like that. The position is space, and then 0.333, and y and z, those x, y, z are now printed with a comma in between, and this shows the position is these numbers. Well, maybe we don't really like the fact that there's so many 3's on here, and there is an option to format your output. A lot of times just printing the variables like this with a comma in between will work just fine. But when you want to control how your numbers look, maybe you want to align the decimal point or something like that, then there is the option to use formatted output. I'll show an example for that. For instance, if we want to have a similar result as we have right now, if we say the position is, and then we can specify with curly brackets and a column, we can specify that we want the floating point to take 7 places, and then behind the point, so type a point, we want 3 decimals. And then we want a comma. And then what will happen is this is a text string, but even though this is text, if we enter after the text, if we enter dot format x, y, z, it will then, and no quotes anymore, but because the quotes end here, now it will, as soon as we do dot format, Python will start looking for these curly brackets inside this text. And when it finds that, it will replace this by the value of this variable according to the format here. And I should also indicate the type. I said it should be 7 places, 3 behind the decimal point, but I also have to tell them this is for a floating point variable, so I have to add f. So 7.3f, comma, semicolon 7.3f, 7.3f tells Python now that there's a floating point variable. It should take 7 spaces and they're 3 behind the decimal point. Let's see how this looks. You see indeed that it has inserted some leading spaces to make sure that the total places taken are 7. These are 5 already, 0.333, and then 2 in front, for instance, for a minus sign or for when the number becomes larger than 10. You see this semicolon here. This is basically a numbering. Before that, we could say 0, 1, and 2. Counting in Python always starts with 0. To indicate this first format refers to this first element of the format string, the second to the second, and the third to the third. If you leave it out, it will automatically do it in the right order. But this allows us, for instance, to say, to use one argument different time, to change the order, for instance, or to say x as, and then we use again element 0, but now we want to have more precision perhaps. Like this. And now we say here x is, and then we refer to the first element of the format. You see we run off the screen here. An easy way to get rid of this problem is to enter a backslash here at the end of the line. Then we can continue on the next line as if it is the first line. So here 0 refers to the first element, and then here it is used again. So even though we have curly brackets in the string 4 times, it will use this number now to find the correct value from the arguments which you pass on to the format function. You see here that we first get it in a different format, and then we get the same numbers 0, 1, 2, the arguments from the format string, like this. So this is how you can format your output. If we are talking about round numbers, for instance, there are 3 coordinates here, and then you could use a similar system, but then it's not a floating point, and it's a decimal number, which means that what you then use is a different format. Let's say we want to take it 3 spaces in decimal format, and then we say argument 4, because we will enter n here, that's actually argument 3. The fourth argument, 0, 1, 2, 3. The fourth argument taken in the format 3 spaces for a decimal point, and if we run it now, it will, n is not defined. Oh, I should call it, I've called it I here, of course. Run. And then n is equal to 3. It takes 3 spaces. And there is the space already in here, of course. And then there's 3 spaces for the number. And then the position is like this. So this is how you format your output.